modifications to the model. If you're unfamiliar with this model, this is my little team ranker that I built for the Ferocious Cup. There's a video elsewhere on my channel that I'll throw a link up to that explains the model as it was originally created. It goes into a lot of details there. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details on the same kind of stuff. Instead, in this video, I'm going to look at how movesets work in this model. So the first thing is I changed the way that I look at movesets in a way that I think is better for the general use, but we'll talk about that. And then secondly, I'm going to look at how you can use this model to investigate different movesets, particularly using legacy moves. So for instance, if you don't have an Umbreon with Last Resort, is it still viable in the Ferocious Cup, or should you go with something else? And so that's what we're going to be looking at there. Also, tomorrow, reportedly, I'm doing a collaboration with Mr. Dr. Pants, who's another YouTuber, and he and I will be looking at some of his off-meta picks, specifically ones with unique movesets. And so the explanation here will just serve as a way of explaining how movesets work within this model and how we're able to investigate those kind of things. So we've got that to look forward to as well. So let's get in it. So I changed the model here specifically by changing whether I was using rows or columns for the home or away team. And the reason that that is different is because of the way that PvPoke outputs CSVs. So my model is built upon data from PvPoke, and specifically I go into each of the Pokemon in each of the rankings, and then I go down to the bottom of the page here and I say export to CSV, and then I plug all of those into a folder. However, there is one thing about these CSVs that might be a little unexpected and therefore leads to this change that I have made. The moveset that Spoink has against Umbreon in this particular CSV that I download from the Ferocious Cup does not need to be the same moveset that Spoink has against Bibarel that I download from the same rankings. What that means is your opponents in this, I believe, tend to have the best movesets against the particular Pokemon that you're looking at. I think that that's a good simplifying assumption, but it does change the way that our model works. So originally, I had it to where your Pokemon had the home team had the best moveset against the away team, which had the meta moveset, which is the moveset that the Pokemon has in the rankings. So for the case of Umbreon, Snarl, Foul Play, Last Resort. That's because I was using rows instead of columns and columns instead of rows. I've now changed that, so I'm looking at it the other way. And this means that your Pokemon have one moveset that is unchangeable, but your opponents have the best moveset against the Pokemon that you throw in. Basically, the worst case scenario, given knowledge about your team and your opponent's team. So a few things about this. One, I think this is a better model for the general case because you can't change your moveset once you're in the tournament. In fact, like that's a specific rule that Sylph has, no using TMs and stuff like that. The other thing is, now I can throw in different movesets from these CSVs. I can say, Umbreon, I don't want Last Resort here. I want Dark Pulse. And I can generate that and download that CSV and plug that into my model. And now the home team has Foul Play and Dark Pulse and not Last Resort, but the opponents still have the best moveset against you. And so that's pretty useful for testing out different movesets. The other thing is it's not going to be biased towards Pokemon that have diverse movesets that you can't use together. So Hippowdon can't use Fire Fang and Thunder Fang at the same time. And so I think in the original model there was a bit of a bias towards Pokemon like that. However, I don't think that we should throw out the results of the original model altogether. I think Hippowdon still has a pretty solid role in that you may know what your moveset is on your Pokemon, but your opponent doesn't. You could have Thunder Fang or you could have Fire Fang, and until you use them in battle, your opponent won't know. Your opponent may guess, but you could surprise them. And there's something to be said for that. And so I think that the original way that the model worked is still useful. I just think that for the general case, restricting you to one moveset and your opponents to the best movesets against that is going to be a better version. The other question is, why would you not have all of the Pokemon have the meta moveset? So all of the Umbreon that you face or use have Snarl, Foul Play, and Last Resort. And I think that that is probably the ideal case for this model. It's more of a middle ground between the two. Unfortunately, with the way that PvPoke works, that means that I have to simulate individual battles against each Pokemon instead of downloading a CSV of all of them at once for each individual mon and then just doing that 30 times. So it's not only a lot of work for me, but it increases the time it takes for this model to run. And so that's why we're going with this particular simplifying model. And so that's the changes that I've made and why I've made them. Don't think we should throw out the original results. They're still good in their own right. The difference being that I think this is better for the general case. But there are specific uses for the old one, and I don't want to just scrap all of the original data. All right, so what does that mean in terms of the actual results? If I didn't do that, then this would be all theoretical stuff that doesn't really particularly matter. And honestly, when I was making this change, I didn't think that it would affect the output very much, but it did. So the first thing that's probably the most important is that the teams themselves have changed. Umbreon as a lead is going to be one of your top leads here of the top teams, and I think that it's pretty accurate to what people have been predicting in the meta. Suicune is still very much a good pick. I thought after looking at the model, I thought, oh no, because Suicune has hidden power, has legacy moves, maybe that biased it to be much better, but it is still actually the number one Mon ranked overall, even if you restrict it to one moveset, which makes sense, but it's good to know considering I've invested quite a bit in Suicune myself, and generally I like the idea of using Suicune in PvP. Bibarel is pretty solid in this cup. Granbull is in some cases better than Alolan Ninetales on the same team. So if you look at Umbreon, Suicune, Granbull, we're up here in the 4th best team. And if we look at Umbreon, Suicune, Alolan Ninetales, we're down here in the 7th best team. And that's a difference of about 50 wins here, which isn't a whole lot when you divide by 12,180, but it is a number of wins that is better. And then there are, of course, some instances in which Alolan Ninetales outperforms Granbull, such as Suicune, Umbreon, Alolan Ninetales versus Suicune, Umbreon, Granbull. So definitely not Granbull is objectively better than Alolan Ninetales, but there are some cases in which it is. The other thing of note from this kind of output is that the number of wins is much lower. So earlier we were looking at teams that had 92% wins, definitely above that 10,000 barrier. Not the case here. And I think that makes sense because essentially we're looking at a much more pessimistic version of the model. It's saying I have a restricted moveset and my opponents are specifically chosen to match against me in such a way that hurts my team. And I think that the worst case is definitely a good case to look at, but it is going to bring those numbers down quite a bit. All right, so if we look at best and worst team, still looks roughly the same. Licky Licky, by the way, is still bad. There was not much change there. It is still quite a bit worse than the Pokemon above it. But Suicune is no longer leaps and bounds above the next best Pokemon. The top 6 also has changed quite a bit. So Alolan Marowak and Hippowdon have been displaced from the top 6 into 11th and 12th. Not much of a fall, but enough to attribute it definitely to the changes in the model. I think that this is because you've got some pretty diverse movesets between Hippowdon and Alolan Marowak that cannot be used together, specifically in the fast moves. So Alolan Marowak has both ghost and fast moves that are pretty good, and so it was probably choosing the ideal one there. And Hippowdon, of course, can use Thunder Fang or Fire Fang, and those are good against specific mons in this meta. And so those have fallen, but not very far, honestly. They're still in the top 12, which is, I guess, kind of arbitrary since Alolan Marowak is at 12th. But they're in the top half of the mons that I'm looking at, which is pretty nice. The ones that have displaced them are Bibarel and Furret. This puts us in an interesting place because in the last model, you could run a team, I think, with the top 6 mons. Sure, Suicune and Vaporeon have the same typing, but we looked at that and either they are good enough that even though they fill the same role, you can use them both on the same team, or they have distinct roles based on the fact that some of the top teams had both Suicune and Vaporeon on them. But here, I don't think you could say the same for having 3 water types in the top 6, especially 3 of the 4 water types that are considered viable enough to be in PvPoke for the Ferocious Cup. The 4th being Floatzel, which unfortunately has not been getting a lot of attention, and I don't think is all that good, though I would be interested in teams that feature Floatzel. The other displacement here belongs to Furret, who's taken our spot as 6th, and I think that that's a pretty good pick there. Of course, Granbull being not quite a replacement for Alolan Marowak, but the other fairy type in the Ferocious Cup that is considered viable by PvPoke. Piloswine being our first ground type, but also some of that ice typing, which puts it in an interesting position. Shelgon, being a dragon type, is an interesting pick here, but must be just pretty good neutral damage. And then we've got some ground Pokemon, Donphan and Hippowdon, Alolan Marowak, Lanoon, Sandslash, which is ranked higher than Alolan Sandslash in this model, which I find interesting. Skuntank, and Nidoking, and Alolan Raticate, and all of the ones that are below the top 15. Ending, of course, at Licky Licky. So quite a bit of change here. And then if we look at the top team in my model versus the top team in PvPoke, that is not to say that PvPoke specifically recommends this team, but if you were to construct a team of the top 3 ranked Mons in PvPoke, you'd get Umbreon, Bibarel, and Vaporeon, whereas with my model, the top team is Umbreon, Vaporeon, Suicune. It's not all that different. I think there's a slight lean towards the top team model. But again, we're only really changing one Pokemon here. And that's Bibarel to Suicune. So I don't expect a lot of change there. But it is interesting that we're a little closer to the PvPoke model now. And I think that has to do with the changes that I have made, and not with any rebalances in the actual stats themselves. Yeah, so that's the change that I made, and why I made it, and why I think it's more accurate for the general use. And so now let's look into some of the ways that we can use this change to look at different movesets. Alright, so if I grab Umbreon here, and I open up Umbreon versus the Ferocious Cup, then I can look at this and say, I don't want to give it foul play, or I don't want to give it last resort. I want to keep foul play. But let's give it Dark Pulse, for example, the only other move that I can get. And then we'll regenerate the battles, exact same battles. Now we can compare the histogram in PvPoke, and I think that's a useful tool here. So we are gaining four wins, and or you gain 4 wins by using the Legacy move, and you get 5 more losses from not having the Legacy move. The difference, of course, being absorbed by the draws. Okay, and so we can download this CSV. And now we've got foul play and Dark Pulse instead of our Legacy. And so we can go into the Ferocious data here that we're reading from and say, all right, I'm going to take Umbreon. These are alphabetical, so here they are. Umbreon. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And then I'm going to upload this new Umbreon that I've got right here. Hit upload, and then boom, our model data has been changed to include Umbreon without Last Resort and with Dark Pulse on the home team. So I want to emphasize this. This should not change your opponent's movesets. And that's one of the reasons I went and made this change in the model. I wanted to make sure that by changing the moveset that you have, we're not changing our opponent's movesets, so that way we can get a more accurate reading on what the ideal movesets are for each particular Mon, given what you have access to. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and run all here. Alright, so that sends me down to the bottom. That was quick because I've already chosen all of those. We've now got the new data loaded, and we should be, I'm going to scroll down. Okay, so we're doing the, we're running all of the calculations, generating a billion different battles between teams. All right, that took 13 seconds after compiling. We've got this fun little table here, and then, all right, now we've got our teams. And not all that unsurprising, your Umbreon leads are not the first pick anymore. In fact, we're looking at a #1 team of Suicune, Bibarel, and Vaporeon, which are all water types. That is interesting. That's not what I expected. I'm a little thrown by that. The second team being Bibarel, Vaporeon, Suicune. So not necessarily a fluke here. Interesting. And then we've got Suicune, Vaporeon, Granbull, Suicune, Umbreon, Vaporeon. So definitely Umbreon is still up there. Let's take a look at the rankings here. Oh, this is what that team looks like that I thought was interesting. Suicune, Bibarel, and Vaporeon. Interesting. And they are, in fact, the 3 water users are the top 3 in the overall pick. Suicune, Vaporeon, Bibarel. Then we got Alolan, Ninetales, Umbreon, and Furret. So actually the top 6 here is exactly the same. We just changed around the order, particularly dropping Umbreon here to 5th from, I believe, 2nd. Then we've got Granbull, Piloswine, Shelgon, Donphan, Powdon, Alolan, Marowak. Pretty much all the same, with the exception of this top 6 moving around business because Umbreon is now in 5th place. Still a very viable Pokemon to use. However, I think it's very interesting that by saying, well, I don't have access to Last Resort, it is now saying that you should just use all water. That's a bold choice. This is also ranking it by number of wins, not necessarily, or it's not looking at trying to go over a spread of teams and being able to take down them. So obviously, if you run into something using electricity, we're gonna have a little bit of a problem with this team. And I think one of the ways we can see that is by looking at average score. So if we look here, yeah, we're no longer suggesting that particular team, except it is 4th. So it must be really good against the teams it's good against. Here we're looking at Suicune, Vaporeon, Alolan, Ninetales, and not many Umbreons in the top 30 team here, ranked by average score. And if we just look at the numbers here, yeah, it is in 7th place, actually. It has been displaced from the top 6 in terms of average score, with Granbull and Piloswine taking its place. Oh, Furret has also been displaced. That's why there have been 2 new additions here. This is interesting. All right. So if you go by average score, perhaps Umbreon is not the Pokemon to be used if it doesn't have Last Resort. However, that's also presuming that you go with 3 water types on your team, which I think is bold. I don't know if I would do that. But it is the number 1 team by number of wins if you don't have Umbreon with Last Resort. I find that interesting. All right. There's one last thing we can do with Umbreon before we move on. What if we just don't give Umbreon a second move? What if we just give it Foul Play? So if we look at the histogram here, things are shifting around for the worse for Umbreon, but the number of wins and losses stays the same. So let's see if that changes our model. All right, so we can take this Umbreon and delete that. Always so dramatic. Permanently delete. You still have the file. All right, there we go. Just Foul Play. Oh, and the reason I can change these around, by the way, is that my model just looks for the start of this string for the right Pokemon, so it doesn't matter anything that comes after that. So I can move those around with ease, and that was a purposeful decision there. All right, so let's run all of that again. Should take a few seconds to generate all of the battles again. To be fair, it is like a billion of them. All right. If you're using Julia Box or most of your Jupyter Notebook setups, just for clarification, the little asterisk indicates that it is running. And so this is the number of things in which it has run. All right, so we're done in less than 13 seconds this time. Also got this nice table. Histogram has been generated. And yeah, without foul play, top team is still, or not without foul play, without Dark Pulse, with only foul play, top team is still the all-water team, which is, again, quite bold. And Umbreon here is still in 5th. So if we look at average score as well, we're going to get Umbreon being in 7th again. So if you don't have Last Resort and you're going to use Umbreon, perhaps you don't want to give it a second move. It is, in fact, 75 candies and 75,000 Stardust, which is quite the investment, especially if you're going with Suicune on your team. And it doesn't, in PvPoke, change any of the wins, losses. And it doesn't, in my model, change its placement a whole awful lot. So I think that it's fair to say that you don't necessarily need a second move on Umbreon if you don't have Last Resort. It is helpful to have Last Resort, though, and it does make noticeable differences within the model. So I think those are the takeaways there. Let's quickly do Vaporeon here. So maybe we can put a little bit of a dent in the water type significance by saying that we don't have access to Last Resort. I'm honestly not incredibly sure what the best second move here should be. I'm inclined to say Hydro Pump. Let's see, 70 wins for Hydro Pump, and Water Pulse has 70 wins as well. Oh, goodness. I'm gonna go with Hydro Pump for now. I think I'll run both of them just because they're just so close, and then none of them as well. Okay. So grab that. Open up our folder here. Find Vaporeon, should be second to bottom because we also have Weavile in this. Gonna permanently delete that. Upload. Watergun, Aquatail, and Hydro Pump. Upload. And then, I want to give Umbreon back Last Resort. So let's say you did the community day, and you got last resort on your Vaporeon, you got Last Resort on your Umbreon, but not on your Vaporeon, for whatever reason. Then that's what this particular version is looking at. So let me go ahead and delete Umbreon as well. Delete. Oh, a good question you might have is, what happens if I just accidentally delete Pokemon and just kind of leave it as deleted? The model just won't run. It'll tell you that something's wrong. And so that happened in one of the versions I was testing. And I was like, oh, I'm just missing a file. All right, so I've got that. We're going to run it again. To reiterate, this is Vaporeon with Water Gun, Aqua Tail, and Hydro Pump. And again, I'm going to run the other one. Let me just go ahead and grab that right now. Vaporeon. While the model is loading, we can just take Aqua Tail and Water Pulse. Okay, now we're ready. How far did we get? We've got the teams built. Okay, perfect. So Umbreon is back in the lead, and Vaporeon is still on the top team. In fact, this top team, Umbreon, Vaporeon, Suicune, I believe is the original top team from our model. The second team is Umbreon, Bibarel, Suicune. Some slight changes here. But yeah, Vaporeon without Last Resort is still a viable choice. And in fact, it's second now. So better, question mark. My model just really loves water, and I do not know why, but here it is. So we've moved around the top 6, but actually nothing has changed in the number of wins. And then in average score, top team still features Vaporeon. And it is second here as well. And our top 6 actually displaces replaces it with Gramble, but not all that much difference. So Last Resort, I don't think is a necessity on your Vaporeon. In fact, you might not even want it. All right, we're going to go ahead and delete that. Upload a new one. We're going to look at Water Pulse now, which is what I downloaded while we were waiting for the model to run. I'm going to go ahead and upload that. And before we do that, I'm going to attempt to remember the number of wins that Vaporeon had before, just so I can compare that. And by attempt to remember, I mean I'm just going to like save that right here. Okay. We're going to run all that again, just so I can see for myself what the best moveset here actually is when you account for teams. Alright, now we're running the team battles, constructing a billion different battles. Alright, and it's done. A little more than 13 seconds this time. There's a little bit of variability in how long that takes. Alright, Vaporeon is no longer in the top team if we give it Water Pulse, which seems to indicate that Vaporeon is not necessarily, or you don't want Water Pulse on your Vaporeon. Rather, you want Hydro Pump, which I think makes sense. This third ranked team is Umbreon, Vaporeon, Suicune, so it's definitely still up there. And if we look at the number of wins here, it's bumped down to 4th place, and it's 7.8 times 10 to the 6th, whereas this one is 8.1 or 8.2. And it's 7.9, not 7.8. So definitely want to go with Hydro Pump there. And is Vaporeon viable if I just don't give it a second move? Which is the other option here. And just not give it a move. Same number of win losses as Aqua Tail, or as Water Pulse, and in fact the same histogram. I'm going to get a comparison here to Hydro Pump. Yeah, some differences there. All right, and we're going to run that battle again, export that to CSV, open up this folder, delete Vaporeon, upload, grab this most recent file, upload, and run everything again. So we didn't see much of a change between Last Resort and the Hydro Pump. So I would anticipate not seeing a whole lot of difference here, but I could be wrong. Actually, I haven't run any of these before. These are being generated like right now. So the first time seeing of it too. If that wasn't obvious. All right, a little more than 13 seconds on that. All right, Vaporeon is not in the top team if you don't give it Hydro Pump. We got Umbreon, Bibarel, and Suicune here. And if we look at the order here, Vaporeon is in 4th with 7.9, pretty much the same as giving it Water Pulse. And I think that that's fairly obvious within PvPoke's rankings. Like if I give it Water Pulse right here, and I hit battle, I look at this histogram, I hit see previous, there's no visible change there. And that's pretty well reflected in the model. So giving Vaporeon a second move is probably good. And you definitely don't necessarily need Last Resort for Vaporeon to be a viable Pokemon. In fact, it's the second best one if you don't have Last Resort, but you do have Aqua Tail and Hydro Pump. So that's interesting. And then the last kind of legacy move here that is particularly viable, in that, by which I mean in the top 30 Mons, which is what I consider in this model, is Nidoking. If we go all the way down to Raichu, Thundershock here is a legacy move. We won't be looking at that right now because my model doesn't extend that far. But just know that there do exist some legacy moves that are quite a ways down. And there are some other legacy moves like Suicune has the legacy hidden power stuff, but those are not the ideal moveset according to PvPoke. So for right now, we're not looking at those either. But yeah, what we are looking at is Nidoking with Fury Cutter. All right, so let's go ahead and grab that. Specifically, we're looking at Nidoking without Fury Cutter. So we got two options here, Iron Tail and Poison Jab. So three different movesets. That's definitely not the one we want to go with. We went from 53 wins to 7 wins. So definitely don't go with Iron Tail, I guess. And then Poison Jab, we still went from 53 to 32. So it appears from the raw PvPoke data that there's a pretty heavy dependence upon the legacy move here for Nidoking, which I think is what people have been saying anyway. But let's just go ahead and check it out. I do want to get rid of this Vaporeon as well. Okay. Which one of these has the legacy move? There. So we're going to add Vaporeon with the legacy Last Resort back into our model. And then we're going to get rid of Nidoking with Fury Cutter. Go ahead and delete that guy. And then we're going to add in this new Nidoking with Poison Jab. For right now, I'm just not going to look at Iron Tail because I don't think that a moveset that has 7 wins in this meta is going to be all that viable. In fact, what even are those 7 wins? If we give it Iron Tail. Alola Ninetales is actually pretty solid. It's a good win to have. And Granbull here as well. And then the rest of these are probably not going to be all that prevalent within the meta. Weavile is also considered in the model here, but that's a tie. Pachirisu is also in the model. That's a win there. But generally, this is not going to be all that good considering you've got 3 wins out of 30 that are considered within the model. So I'm just not going to look at that. I got to run this all again. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I already changed that. All right. So we've got Poison Jab in there. We're just going to wait for that to run. Generated tables. And it just takes a few moments. Used to take 8 hours, so this is pretty solid that I can just run these right now. Up to 14 seconds for this one. I don't think there's much of a dependence on the moveset to the time it takes. I just think there's some underlying things with Julia Box that change that. And our number 1 team here is Umbreon, Vaporeon, Suicune. Not a lot has changed, I think, in terms of this. We're going to go ahead and look at Nidoking, which is now ranked 29th. The only thing being worse than Nidoking being our good friend Licky Licky. And, you know, that's to be expected. So if you're going to use Nidoking, you definitely want the legacy move on that. I don't think you need it on Umbreon and Vaporeon. I think you want it on Umbreon. On Vaporeon, I think the model is fairly indifferent. You can have that, or you can have a Hydro Pump. But if you're using Nidoking, you definitely need the legacy move there. All right, so that's just a little update on how I use movesets, how you can input different movesets into the model and check them out, and a little bit of an investigation into whether legacy moves are really all that they're cut out to be, and whether or not you need them to use certain Pokemon, and then just creating this general method of inputting a particular moveset so that I can do that tomorrow with Mr. Dr. Pants, which you should also watch that video. He's got some pretty interesting off-meta things that we're looking at, specifically with the non-standard movesets. So we've got that to look forward to, and I will keep updating this model, and we'll create that video, and we'll let you know when that gets out.